All right. Okay, so a few months ago, I started a new job. And when I started this new job, I thought to myself, maybe after work, I can go and exercise. Before work, if I'm optimistic, I can go and exercise. So I Googled some gyms to go to. And I found some local ones, and I emailed all these gyms. I asked them all my first world problems, which is, do you have lockers, you got towels, are there any classes not on the class list, all this kind of stuff. And for a bit of context, I only do classes. I'm not one of those people that goes to the gym, picks up weights, or runs on the treadmill. I prefer to pay people to shout at me, and I prefer to do it with other people. And I think it's like church as well. So when you're here in the mornings, when you're here in the mornings, we sing and we sing together, and it's a lot easier to sing when other people are with you. And when the verses appear above me, you all want to read the verses, but when you're at home, you may not want to read your Bible, but that's okay. And when Richard talks, he's there telling us what to do, giving us guidance, and it's a lot easier when there's somebody else telling you where to go, guiding you. So that's why I do classes. And anyhow, I emailed these gyms, and then one of them replied me, and I will never forget the email. And it said, "Josh, we have everything. All you need to bring is 3 things. Number 1, bring something comfortable to wear. Good set of clothes, good set of trainers. Easy, can tick that box. Right. Number 2, you need to be hydrated. So bring a bottle of water. Again, tick that box. And finally, above all, Josh, bring a good attitude." And I love that. I love that because the most important out of those 3 things is your attitude that you bring. So today, I look out of you. You guys look good. You've got the right clothes on. Number 2, you've got your phones, your notepads, or in Ashley's case, you've got your notebook and your crayons. So well done. But above all, please, I hope you bring a good attitude, all right? And I heard a story early this week, and it was about a guy who needs to get his driving license changed. And he's in America, so he was looking at all these different centers to get it changed. Each one had all had 1-star reviews. So it's like, this one has bad reviews, that one has bad reviews. If I drive an hour, it's still got bad reviews. But he decided when he went, he was going to be a 5-star customer in a 1-star environment. And when he turned up there, he starts making jokes with people. He gets to the door, and he's like, "Oh, you guys go ahead of me. Go on." And the person that he ends up joking with happens to be one of the people at the till. So she says to him, why are you here? He was like, I got my driving license, hasn't been renewed in a while, I really need to do it, and so I decided, today's the day. And she goes, "Okay, why don't you just come around the side, I'll do it for you, and then I'll jump into the queue with everybody else." So this guy was able to get his license renewed in, I think it was half an hour, but he had a 5-star attitude in a 1-star environment. Now, today I'm going to speak from the story of Joseph. So I'll give you a quick rundown of the story of Joseph. And Joseph is a son of Jacob, and Jacob has 12 sons. But the son that he loves the most above all is Joseph. And to show how much he loves him, he gives him a multicolored coat. So whenever he puts this coat on, his brothers see, "Oh, that's the son that my father loves the most." To add fuel to the fire, Joseph tells these dreams to his brothers. He says to them, "I had a dream last night. God told me that you all are going to bow down in front of me." And these made him furious, made his brothers furious. And then one day, Joseph was with his father in Hebron, and his father says, "I want you to go to Shechem, check on your brothers and see how they're doing, and report back." Joseph goes to Shechem, can't find his brothers, and a man says to him, "Your brothers, they're in a place called Dothan." So he goes to Dothan, and he finds his brothers. But when his brothers see him coming from a distance, they plan to throw him into a pit, and they sell him to Ishmaelite slave traders, or Ishmaelite merchants. And they take his jacket, they rip it, they dip it in blood, and then they say to their father, "This is your favorite son, he has been killed." But Joseph, he goes to Egypt, he gets bought by Potiphar, he works in Potiphar's house. Maybe it's a 2-star environment in Potiphar's house, but he has a 5-star attitude, he rises to the top. Then he gets accused by Potiphar's wife. I read a children's church book once, and apparently Potiphar's wife is called Hotiphar because she's really hot. So Hotiphar says to Potiphar's wife, so Hotiphar says, this guy's done this, X, Y, Z, and then she accuses him, he goes to the king's prison. In the prison is a one-star environment. Again, Joseph has a five-star attitude, and then he rises to the top. He interprets 2 more dreams, and then he goes and meets Pharaoh. When he meets Pharaoh, he interprets Pharaoh's 2 dreams: 7 years of prosperity, 7 years of great harvest, and then 7 years of famine. But Joseph, being Joseph, he doesn't just stop with interpreting the dreams. He goes one step further. He says, Pharaoh, this is what you should do. You should get a wise man, you should put him in charge, save 20% of all the grain that you harvest, and then in the bad times, you can sell it to Egypt, sell it to the people in Egypt, as well as sell it to the rest of the world. So, in that 7 years of famine, he meets his brothers, he reunites with his father and his brothers, and then that's where, more or less, where the story ends. But there's something interesting in the story of Joseph, in that it all starts in Hebron. So, in Hebron means to join together. Then his father tells him, go to Shechem. Now, Shechem means shoulders, and shoulders represents supporting. So, what do you put your support in? And Dothan, it means 2 wells. So, essentially, Joseph is making a trip between Hebron and Dothan. It means he's going to join together 2 nations, joining together 2 wells, which is Egypt and Israel. And that is the life of Joseph. And on the way, he stops off at Shechem. And Shechem means to support. So his life is joining 2 nations, but learning to put his support in God at the same time. So my first point is dreams are important. Now, why do I say dreams are important? I say this because there are 6 dreams in the story of Joseph. He has 2 dreams himself. He interprets the dream of the cupbearer and the baker, and then Pharaoh has 2 dreams. So dreams are important. I was thinking to myself, like, if dreams are important, why are they important? I've got 3 reasons why I believe that dreams are important. So number 1, dreams give us direction. They give us a way of travel so we know where we want to go. And there's a quote out there that says, a boat without direction is at the mercy of every wind. Point being is, if you don't know where you want to go, you're just going to float around aimlessly, and you won't reach anywhere because you have nowhere to reach. Number 2, another important reason to have a dream, and maybe the most important reason, is because it gives you purpose. It gives you your why behind why you want to do something. Now, I've watched countless videos online of how to wake up early. You can probably see what I struggle with, but how to wake up early. And all these videos, they have one thing in common, is you need to have a strong why. Like, why do you want to wake up early? If you want to wake up at 5 a.m., so that's where you want to go, why do you want to do it? Is it because you want to get the train before everybody else so you can get a seat? Is it because you want to read the Bible? Is it because you want to spend time exercising? But your why has to be so strong that when you wake up, it's not, shall I do it, shall I not? It's, I remember my why, and then you execute from there. So it's important to have a strong why. Now, the third reason to have a dream is because it pushes you outside of your comfort zone. Now, if you want to run a marathon, for example, you're going to have to train for it. And in order to train for it, you're going to be in uncomfortable places. Just like Joseph, he had the dream that his brothers were going to bow down to him, which essentially means that Joseph, he was going to be in a position of authority. So in order to be in a position of authority, he had to be outside of his comfort zone. He had to grow and develop. And part of that was working in Potiphar's house. Now, when he was at home with his father Jacob, he had servants do this for him, he had servants cook for him, he had servants bring him his clothing, his items. But when he was in Potiphar's house, he had to cultivate those skills and those abilities. He had to get that persistence to keep on going. Even though he knew that he reached the top, he still had to have that spirit of excellence to keep maintaining those standards. And again, when he was in prison, in that 1-star environment, he still had to have that 5-star attitude, no matter where he went. So why are dreams important? Number 1, it gives you a direction of where to go. It gives you a why, a purpose of why do you want to get there? Why is it so important to you? And number 3, it helps to build you into the person that God wants you to be. I fully believe that God has placed these dreams and these goals inside of us. And in order for us to execute upon these dreams and these goals, we have to be the person that Jesus sees us as. And to do that, we will need to be outside of our comfort zone. When I think of achieving dreams or even trying to achieve dreams, something that comes along success is failure. And there's many people that have failed in the Bible. But whenever I think of failure, I always look at athletes, I always think of like business people, for example. And I'll also give an example from the Bible. But one of the athletes, which I'm sure many of you know, is Roger Federer. So he's a tennis player. And he gave a commencement speech not too long ago. And he basically said, I've won north of 80% of all my tennis matches. But do you know what percentage of points I've won? I've won 52% of all the points. Meaning that if you spin a coin, you throw a coin in the air, heads or tails is his win or lose. He was saying, I don't win these tennis matches because I hit the ball harder. I don't win it because I can run faster or I can put more spin on the ball. The reason I win these tennis matches more than other people is because I can forget my mistakes faster. If you're going to win a point and then lose every other point, you need to be able to forget the mistakes faster than your opponent so you can get back on the line, reset, and go again. It's his mindset that was his key to victory. In terms of business, everyone knows who Elon Musk is. And a while back, he released a Cybertruck, which is basically like this new truck. And he claimed it was bulletproof, it could do this, could do that. But on the demonstration, he managed to break the window. And obviously, it was pretty embarrassing for himself. He said it was going to have all these features. It was going to cost $35,000 US. When it went on sale, it was $95,000 US, nearly 3 times the price. But when you think of Elon Musk, you think this genius, this guy that he's going to change the world. But if he had said to himself, I've just released this truck, it's 3x the price of what I plan to, and he buried his head in the sand, none of us would know who he is. But he chooses to not recognize his mistakes. He chooses to forget the mistakes and then move forward. A bit like what Richard was saying. I was quite glad you said that at the start. So yeah, you want to just forget, when you make a mistake, just like Roger Federer, you wipe that slate clean, you get back on the baseline, and you go again. And the most important definitely the most important is Jesus. And in the Bible, Jesus tells us to remember one person. He doesn't say, remember Abraham, the father of our faith. He doesn't say, remember Adam, the first human being, or remember Moses. Remember how he took the Israelites out of Egypt. He split the Red Sea. The person that Jesus tells us to remember is remember Lot's wife. Now, Lot's wife was known for one thing and one thing only. She was known for looking back. Point being is, don't look back. Don't live in the past. There's a quote that says, too much of the past equals depression, too much of the future equals anxiety. If you want the cure for both, it's to live in the present. No, don't look back. Just focus on where you are now. Focus on executing on the next step in front of you. Jeremiah 29:11, probably one of the Hall of Fame Bible verses. Let me tell you what it does not say. It does not say, I know the plan I have for your life. It says, I know the plans I have for your life. Multiple plans. Meaning that you have unlimited mistakes. There's enough grace for all the mistakes you're going to make. It's not one plan God has. If it was one plan, we would all be toast by now. But it's multiple plans. Plans with an S. Okay. And when I think of dreams, I always think two things. I think you're never too young to have a dream. At the same time, you're never too old to have a dream. I remember a while back, I asked Eliana, what do you want to be when you grow up? She goes, I want to be a princess. I was like, all right, let's take it a step back. Let's say when you go to be a princess, there's no more spaces left to be a princess. So what do you want to be? She goes, oh, in that case, I want to be a queen. I was like, okay, what if you can't be a queen and there's, all the queens got booked up in January, so you can't be a queen? She was like, well, I'm going to be a mermaid, obviously. Then I was like, if you can't be a mermaid, let's say you just don't like swimming so much, so you don't want to be a mermaid, what do you want to be? She was like, I'll be a housewife then. The point being is, there's no limitations on children's dreams. Right? They don't write themselves off. They don't think, oh, you know what? If I want to be a doctor, I need to have this degree, I need to go to this university, do this, do that. They just go for it. And oftentimes, I think, before we get rejected for a job, before we get rejected for a position, we first reject ourselves. A few years ago, I was in audit at the time, looking to transfer to a different division. And I remember I was asking people, oh, have you tried going to this sector? And they were like, I heard it's really competitive. I don't think it's a move that I could make. And I was like, did you try? The person would be like, no, I didn't try, but I heard from this person it was really hard. So then I asked that person, so-and-so told me that you went to try and move into this industry. It's like, how did it go? And he goes, oh, well, I didn't try. I just heard from somebody else it was really hard. Point being is that they rejected themselves before they even tried. So before you hit rejection, before you say no to yourself, at least give it a try and give it a few tries, okay? Now, I said you're never too young to dream. At the same time, you are never too old to dream. And in my opinion anyway, one of the Hall of Fame Bible people is Caleb in the Bible. And at this point in time, in Joshua 14:12, Caleb is 85 years old. One of my favorite verses, it says, "Now therefore, give me this mountain, of which the Lord spoke in that day for you heard that day how the Anakim were there, and the cities were great and fortified. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall be able to drive them out, as the Lord said." Now, this is Caleb in the Promised Land. So the Israelites have crossed the River Jordan. They're now in the Promised Land. Caleb can choose any bit of land to go after. But he says, give me the hardest bit of land. The Anakim are giants. He chose the land, not just with the giants, but the land with the giants and the 45 cities. And this guy is 85 years old. He said, give me this mountain. When you go for your dreams, go for the big things, right? Go for the hard things to achieve out there. Just like Caleb did this. But Caleb's view of himself was, if I look in the mirror, what do I see? Do I see Caleb, or do I see God inside of me? And you need to see who God sees in you. And he sees somebody who is perfect. When he sees your history, Ben always says, when he sees your history, he sees the cross. The cross is spotless, the cross is blameless. So when you see yourself, you need to see yourself the same way God sees you. Now this verse starts, now therefore. So I've learned if you have a now therefore, or a therefore, or a whatsoever, or a whosoever, something, you want to look at the verse before it. So it says, the verse before, Joshua 14:11 says, "As yet I am as strong this day as on the day that Moses sent me. Just as my strength was then, so now is my strength for war, both for going out and for coming in." So as strong as the day that Moses sent me. Over 40 years ago, he still maintained his strength. He had the same strength when he was in his 40s than when he was 85. Strength for war. It doesn't say strength to do the housework, strength to walk the dog, strength for war. For going out and for coming back in. Now the going out and coming back in bit is important. Because to go out is one thing. To go out there and achieve your dream is one thing. But to come back in and enjoy your dream is something else. But God wants us to do both. He wants us to achieve it, but at the same time, he also wants us to enjoy it. Enjoy the work, have that rest that we can have in God. Now going back to the story of Joseph, Joseph's dream was to have his brothers bow down to him. And his brothers bowed down to him not once, not twice, but a total of 5 times. As we know in the Bible, the number 5 represents grace. It's the number of grace. So there was enough grace for Joseph to achieve the dream that God placed inside of him. It's maybe not even Joseph's dream, but it's God's dream for him. So same for you. There's enough grace to achieve the plans that you have, the dreams that you have inside of you. Now, if you know somebody that has a dream, I would encourage you to do one thing, which is to encourage them. Okay. And I remember a sermon that Ashley preached a few years ago, and it was about encouragement, and he mentioned David encouraged himself in the Lord. Now, David encouraged himself in the Lord is not David encouraged himself. If you encourage yourself, maybe you can do this for a few months, a few years, but to encourage yourself in the Lord means that you're pulling down on a supply that is endless. Now, like I mentioned in my offering message, it's if the lamb is too big for the household, if the supply is too much, right? If God's supply is too much, encourage yourself in the Lord. I always think of Psalms chapter 1, verse 3. So it's he shall be like a tree planted by rivers of water. So a tree, one singular tree, one person. That person is you. By your streams of water, not just one stream, but multiple streams. So you have a stream of good relationships with your family, good friends, fulfilling career or work, enjoying your hobbies, many, many holidays, right? Whatever your streams are, you write those streams down. You might not have 5, you might have 55, but put those streams down. That one life, but the multiple streams. One person, but God wants to give you so much. So David encouraged himself in the Lord. He pulled down from the goodness from the streams of God who was in heaven. Now, another example is as much as you want to encourage yourself in God, it's important to encourage other people. And this is one of my favorite things in the message today. So, this is from Joshua, and specifically I think Joshua chapter 1, verse 12. So in Joshua chapter 1, at this point in time, Moses has just died, so Joshua is taking control. And in Joshua 1, verse 12, he speaks to 3 tribes. These 3 tribes in particular, so the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and the tribe of Manasseh. Now, these 3 tribes have a very interesting story, because before they got to the promised land, they said to Moses, Moses, we got all these sheep, got all these cattle, all these horses, all these donkeys. If we go into the promised land, there's not going to be enough space for all of our brothers to go in with us. Right? So instead of us going into the promised land, we'll make you a deal. Can we have the land on the east of the river? Now Moses says to them, no way you can have the land on the east of the river. God promised us the promised land. And the only reason you're saying this is because you don't want to fight. And they say, Moses, listen, we are more than happy to fight, but we actually need this land here because of the size, because it's good for our herds. And Moses says, I'll make you a deal. And the deal is, when the time comes to fight, you must fight. And you can only have this land if you fight every battle. And when the land rests, then only you can come back. And they say to Moses, all right, Moses, we'll make a deal with you. So in Joshua chapter 1, Joshua says to these tribes, Moses may be dead, but I still remember the deal that you made. So are you with me or are you against me? Are we united together? And they say to Joshua, Joshua, we remember that deal and we are with you. Now, then these 3 tribes, when it comes time to cross the river in Joshua chapter 5, they do something different. When the river splits, these 3 tribes, they cross the river first. They're crossing a river to engage with the enemy, and they're going to fight for land that they will not own. They're going to fight for possessions that they will not keep. And they're doing it while leaving their wives, their children, and all their cattle behind. If you're the tribe of Judah, if you're the tribe of Benjamin, the tribe of Simeon, and you see your brothers going across the river first, knowing there is nothing there for them to gain, and they will fight the most battles out of everybody, you can only feel encouraged that these brothers, they might die out there. There's no land for them to keep, but yet they go first. That's encouraging. I say this because if you want to encourage somebody, do something for them that is no benefit for you. Right? When let's say for example, somebody wants to become a good writer, you give them a book that helps them on writing. When you do that, when it has no benefit for you, it speaks volumes to them. And also, don't discourage your own encouragement. Like I mentioned, we first reject ourselves before anybody else rejects us. But your encouragement, your word to somebody means more than you think. Now, there's a story with these 3 tribes. Even though that they encouraged their brothers, there's the backstory to it, which is these were the first 3 tribes to turn away from God, meaning that they were on the east of the river. The river was supposed to be there to protect them, but they were on the wrong side. And the only other reason they were there was because they had all these possessions. And I say this because don't be weighed down by the possessions that you have. They were never supposed to have that much cattle, that much herd, so they did not enter the promised land. They got too big too quickly. Be patient with God. Sometimes we want things the next day, want things the next hour. But God wants us to be outside of our comfort zone sometimes, to develop these skills, just so when it is time, we are able to approach the challenge and be ready for the challenge. There's a very famous motivational speaker, and his name is Tony Robbins. And Tony Robbins, he has these seminars. There are thousands of people that pay a lot of money to be at these seminars. So one day he has a seminar and the warm-up act comes on. And he goes, all right, everybody, we're going to get your blood pumping. We're going to get you moving a bit. So to do this, we're going to play a game of Simon Says. So he goes, all right, everybody stand up. And half the room stand up. And he goes, all right, you're all out. I didn't say Simon Says stand up. You're all out. And he goes, all right, Simon says stand up. Simon says clap your hands. Simon says stomp your feet. They go on and on and on until they get to the final 5 people. And he says, all right, final 5 people, Simon says, stand up. Now, we're going to take a 30-second pause here. And he starts asking members of the audience. And he says, young lady, what did you think of the exercise? And she said, it was a good exercise. I was able to meet some new people around me. But, there are 3,000 people here. I didn't really believe I could win, but I really enjoyed meeting the people around me, and I met a good connection for my business. He asked another person, what do you think of the exercise? And he says, it got my blood pumping. I feel ready for the session, ready for the seminar. Again, 3,000 people here. Not sure that I could win, but it was a good experience to be a part of it. The point being is that there might have been 3,000 people in the room, but only five of them believe that they could win. So when you go for your job, when you're writing a book or whatever it is, you must believe that you can do it. And the people that you think you're competing against probably don't believe in themselves, so you're really not competing against them. You're only competing against the 1 or 2 people that truly believe that they can win. So if you want to finish writing that book, you want to start writing 1 word at a time. I was thinking to myself the other day, if I want to read the Bible in a year, how do I do it? I don't start by reading 1 chapter at a time, 1 book at a time. I start by reading 1 verse at a time. Maybe on January 1st, I'll read 1 verse. Maybe January 2nd, I'll double it to 2 verses. But you take small steps and take small steps at a time. Okay, now point number 2, so that's point number 1. Point number 2 is, you first have to be loved to have authority. I say this because in the life of Joseph, the first thing that we know about Joseph is he had this multicolored coat. And let me tell you what this coat does not represent. It does not represent how much Joseph loved his father. It doesn't represent how much he loved his mother. It doesn't say, Joseph, I am Joseph, I love to be loved. It says, I'm Joseph and I'm loved by my father. It's not an expression of how much he loved other people. It's an expression of how much God loved him. And sometimes for us, we need to put that same coat on, that coat of love, to show that we are loved by God. And only once he first put that coat on was he able to put the other items on. When he met Pharaoh, Pharaoh gave him 3 things. He gave him a gold necklace, he gave him white linen, and he gave him a ring of authority. Before he could have that ring of authority, he first had to put on that coat of love. Before you have authority, you have to understand that you are loved. And this coat of love also protected Joseph. When his brothers threw him into the pit, they took this coat off him. They tore it and they dipped it in blood and gave it back to their father. But it was this coat that they saw from a distance that protected Joseph. And the reason I say protected Joseph was because his brothers, these are people of hard hearts. Right? These are people that were able to hold grudges. They knew that Joseph was not dead. They knew that Joseph was sold, but they did not tell their father. And they saw their father weeping, they saw him upset, they saw him depressed every day. Not just for 1 week, not just for 1 month, but they saw him like that for 22 years. Now, I can understand if you want to hold a grudge for a week, a month, a year, that's about the max. But 22 years is a long period of time to hold a grudge. And they probably would have held it forevermore. Point is that if Joseph was surrounded by these type of people, he probably would have been the same. So it was that coat of love, that coat which they saw sparkling in the distance that protected them, meaning that God's love is there to protect you. It matters where your seed is planted. It matters the environment that you're in. One of the verses in Proverbs is iron sharpens iron. If you want to be sharpened, you have to be around like-minded people. Be planted in good soil. From the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? So for your heart to overflow, you must be in a good place. You must be able to see your identity the way that Caleb saw it. He saw himself as an overcomer. Even though he was 85, he saw himself as a 40-year-old. He saw himself with strength that God gave him. When he looked in the mirror, he did not see his physical body. He saw God behind him. There's a company out there, and it's quite a prestigious company, so they attract some of the top talent. They have people from Oxford, people from Cambridge, Imperial, all these very prestigious universities. And whenever they have these people come and interview, they always get this one Australian guy to interview them. And the reason why he's Australian is because he will always pretend to not know these universities. So if you say, oh, I went to Oxford University, I got a PhD, he'll be like, oh, is that free online university that recently started? Or if it's Cambridge, he'll be like, oh, is that the university, next to, is that in Glasgow or something? The point being is, he would always discredit their universities to see if their identity was in the university or if their identity was in how they saw themselves. The candidates that just had Oxford, they wore Oxford wherever they went, but they had nothing left. When they took that away from them, they couldn't answer a single question. But then there were the candidates that saw themselves as, I'm a problem solver, I work hard, I'm a diligent person, and these candidates shone through. So if I say to you, if I took your CV, I wiped it clean, the next day when you walk into work, could you walk into work believing that you could solve problems, believing that you have the authority that you have? Like, where does your identity lie? Sometimes people's identity, it lies in their job, the work that they do. It relies in their status in an organization or a club. But where do you see yourself? Do you see yourself the way God sees you, like Caleb? Or do you see yourself with that piece of paper? Be like Joseph, that 5-star mentality, that 5-star attitude in a 1-star situation. God so loved Abraham, God so loved Isaac, and God so loved Jacob. And I like the story of Joseph because it shows that God is a turnaround God. And I always like to say that he's the best recycler on the planet. So if you think about how Joseph was saved, he was saved by Ishmaelite merchants, rather. So these merchants took him from Israel, from Dothan, and they sold him in Egypt. Now, Ishmaelite merchants, they come from Ishmael. Now, Ishmael came from Abraham. And Ishmael and Abraham, this was a mistake that happened 3 generations ago. So it was a mistake that happened 3 generations ago that saved Joseph. Imagine that. God can take your mistakes and turn it into a way to make a path forward for you. Whenever you think you made a mistake, you must write it off in your mind, but understand that God sees an opportunity to turn that mistake around for you, just like he did for Abraham and saving Joseph. Okay, now point number 3 is, this is one of my favorite points, so it's about your hearing. So I've written down, when your hearing is locked up, you run out of food. For a bit of context at this point, there is the 7 years of famine. 2 years into the 7 years of famine, the Israelites, they approach Egypt and they meet Joseph. So the brothers meet Joseph, and Joseph says, you guys aren't here to buy food. Why you're really here is because you want to spy out the land. You know that we're weak, you know that we have a famine, you want to see if you can take us. And the brothers were like, honestly, we're just here to buy food. And then Joseph says to them, where do you come from? He was like, we come from Canaan. We have a father and we have 2 other brothers. One is deceased and the other one is at home. So Joseph says, if you are telling the truth, I want you to bring your younger brother here. But so I know that you're going to come back, I'm going to keep one of your brothers. And the brother that I'm going to keep is Simeon. Now, Simeon's name means hearing. Point being is that when the brothers went home, they went home without their hearing. And when they went home without their hearing, they ran out of food. Now, when they came back to get more food, they could only enter Joseph's house when they had Benjamin and when they had Simeon. So when they had their hearing, then only could they enter. So I say this because it is so important to have your hearing and to be hearing. Right? It's one thing to hear but not listen, but it's another thing to hear and also to listen. So what you hear is important, but also the act of hearing is important. Tari, if you could put my image on the screen. Okay. So this is a table, and it's basically in Numbers chapter 1, when they first went into the wilderness, they did a census. They went to see how many men, this is men only, of each tribe are there. So Numbers chapter 1. And they did it again 38 years later in Numbers chapter 26. They want to see how many men are in the tribe. Now there's 2 big changes, as you can see. Number 1, the tribe of Manasseh. This tribe, it was prophesied that they would grow, they would be a strong tribe, and they fulfilled that prophecy. But there's another tribe that had the opposite effect. The tribe of Simeon. They dropped by more than 60% in 38 years. Now 38 years is roughly 1 generation, but they lost about 60% of the men in that tribe. Again, the name Simeon means hearing. So I say this because hearing is important, But what is equally as important is what you choose to hear. The reason why Simeon dropped so massively is because in Numbers chapter 25, before 26, they started following false gods, false idols. And therefore their numbers dropped. So hear good things, listen, but what you hear is equally as important. Now, 3 ways to know what you're hearing is important. Number 1, does it align with the Word of God? This is pretty binary, it's a yes or no question. So does it tick that box? If it doesn't, you don't need to hear it. You don't need to abuse them, leave malicious comments on YouTube, just move on. Okay, number 2, is the fruit of that person good? Now, yes or no? And number 3, do you feel encouraged afterwards? Right, I don't think you're supposed to listen to a message where you feel condemned afterwards, you feel like depressed. You come to church to take the weight off your shoulders. And if you leave feeling depressed, leave feeling upset, it's not a good place to be. So feel encouraged and look at the fruit. Earlier this year I had the opportunity to go to a church in Singapore. It's Joseph Prince Church. And if you're a visitor, you go there early. They have somebody show you around. So me and my friend, we were there, and we got there like way too early, and they showed us around, and it was this building that they built. The building it cost them $400 million to build. They paid it off in 4 years, and they took 3 offerings specific to the building. I was asking the lady, so now that you've paid it off, like, what do you do with all the money? Like, when you raise money, what do you do? And they were like, we have so much money that we invest it in property, and we take that money and then we give it to the community. Imagine that you have a church where you're not living paycheck to paycheck, but you're there, you're able to build something to even supercharge the growth that God has given you. Proverbs always talks about being focused, and I say being focused because hearing is all about being focused. When you're hearing the right things and when you are hearing, you are able to be focused. And Proverbs talks about wisdom is calling you. Wisdom is there, is calling. But then there's distractions on the right or the left. And you don't want to go to the right, you don't want to go to the left. You want to stay on the road. And whenever I think about this, I think of Olympic runners. If you're in a marathon, you're in the Olympic marathon, let's say, and if you're running down the road, someone's going to say to you, mate, you're so slow, you stink, you've never seen the inside of a gym, whatever it is. But these runners, they don't go and they don't argue with the spectators and then carry on running. They just keep on running. They maintain their focus going forward. Now, my final point number 4, is do not delay. One of my favorite verses recently is Genesis 43:10, and it says, if we had not delayed, we would have returned twice. This is Judah saying it to his father Jacob, saying if we had just gone with Benjamin, we could have got grain and come back. We could have got grain and come back. So do not delay. Whatever dreams that you have in your heart, please execute them and just walk and take that first step. When they went to Joseph's house, they went there to buy grain. You may have a dream to write one book. Like the Israelites, they went there to buy grain. But what they got was meat. Right? God had something better for them. At the sight of Benjamin, they got meat. Benjamin represents favor. So at the sight of you, there is favor. And you're going to get more than what you planned and more than what you asked for. So have that confidence that wherever you are, when you walk into a situation, you are that Benjamin. You have your hearing, you have your Simeon, you have your Benjamin, that favor that is for you. Okay. And one of the quotes which I quite like is, it says, you want to be impatient with action, but you want to be patient with results. When I say impatient with action, I mean, if you feel led to pray for somebody, go and pray for them. If you feel led to read your Bible, read your Bible. If you feel led to rest, be impatient to rest and trust God. Now, those 2 words maybe don't go together, be impatient to rest. But you need to be able to rest to trust God. When I think of rest, I always think of Abraham. When he tried so hard to conceive a child, he conceived Ishmael. But when he rested is when he had Isaac. In the Bible it says Abraham was in the oaks of Mamre. Oaks represent strength. Mamre means strength. And he was sitting down at the time. Sitting down in the heat of the day. At the hottest point of the day when everybody was resting, Abraham also chose to go to rest. He chose to rest in the strength of strength. In the oaks of Mamre, he chose to rest. And when he rested in the strength of strength, that's when somebody appeared. God is willing to go to work for you at the hottest point of the day, the most uncomfortable place to work. God will go to work for you. So Genesis 43:10, if we had not delayed, we would have returned twice. So be impatient with action, but patient with results. And to wrap up my message, if you have those dreams, please go ahead and execute on them. Number one, my point one was dreams are important, so have those dreams. It gives you direction, it gives you purpose, and it pushes you outside of your comfort zone. Point number two, you first have to be loved to have authority. So understand that before you have authority, before you action, understand the place that you're starting. You're starting from a position of love. You're starting, when you look at your history, it's at the cross. God is your identity, not your CV, not anything else. God is your identity. And in order to stay focused on your dreams, you need to be hearing. Not just hearing anything, but hearing quality. So it matters that you hear, but also what you hear. And point number four is, do not delay. Make a start now. In 1st of January isn't too far away. I think 23 days away. But don't wait for the 1st of January to start. Right? Start now. Have a head start above everybody else. 23-day head start. So today's the day. And yesterday I was thinking, what would be, how do I know if this message was a success? Was it good or was it bad? And what would make this special would be if at some point, it doesn't need to be next week or the week after, whenever, if somebody said to me, you know what, Josh, I really like what you said. I wrote down my dream on the Sunday, I started on the Sunday, I failed on the Monday, and I tried again on the Tuesday. That would be special. But today, I hope you enjoyed listening, and thank you very much for paying attention. So that wraps up my message for today, and thank you very much.